Hello and welcome to the Monday, August 18th, 2025 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich, recording today from Jacksonville, Florida. And this episode is brought to you by the SANS.edu Bachelor's Degree Program in Applied Cybersecurity. On Friday, we had a diary by Yijing. Yijing is associated with the Singapore University of Technology and Design, and a group at the university did introduce at a recent Usenix conference a new tool to passively sniff, but then also inject data into 5G connections. That's something that has been sort of quite common in attacks against Wi-Fi and such, not so much for 5G or other cell phone protocols. They have really relied more on rogue base stations and the like. But of course, yes, once you understand a protocol, once you're able to sniff data from the air, you're also typically enabled then to inject data just passively. And that's what they looked at here with this framework they created. Now, the pronunciation guideline here is SNIF-GET, if I get it correctly. SNI 5G ECT is how the tool is being spelled, and well, it's derived from sniff, 5G, and inject. So it's just a compression of those three terms. But yeah, their full paper is also available via Usenix, and you do, for example, have sort of a quick overview how it works. The tool here is basically just listening in passively on the traffic and then able to, and it's really more of a timing attack in this case, inject carefully timed frames into the data traffic. The simplest task here is, of course, a denial of service attack, but the one tricky attack here also allows for downgrades by essentially sort of making authentication fail here, and then you can force a client to downgrade to 4G, which of course has its own security issues, and that can then be attacked more easily. And in vulnerabilities, it's Plex's turn again. The famous video and media player has a severe vulnerability that has been addressed last week. Usually, Plex doesn't really point that much attention to vulnerabilities, so I would definitely take this one serious, even though there is sadly no CVE number and absolutely no details about what the vulnerability exactly entails. Remember, LastPass, that's sort of the big warning here when they were breached. The original entry point was a vulnerability in a Plex Media Server on a developer's machine. Well, don't be that developer. Be quicker in updating Plex, and that's your chance now. And then for any Fortiweb users out there, we now have a proof of concept, additional detail regarding the Fortiweb vulnerability that was patched about a week ago. This vulnerability had already been exploited, but now some of the details are public. It's one of those standard web application issues where you do have a parameter that's security relevant being supplied by the user. The parameter in question here is referred to as ERA, ERA. It's a part of the cookie parameter, and it essentially points to memory that's being used as a key in order to then validate the payload that's also part of the cookie. Well, it turns out that by supplying an out-of-bound error parameter, it's possible to essentially have a 0 or all null encryption key, which then bypasses that security feature and, well, allows an attacker to essentially impersonate arbitrary users. Pretty interesting vulnerability. Don't remember having seen something quite like that, but it's really sort of that very basic web application security issue. Don't trust the user. Users are always evil. And to talk about more traditional web application vulnerabilities, we have to look at the latest AI tools. Flowwise suffers from an OS remote command injection. This vulnerability was discovered by JFrog, and JFrog also delivered a very trivial and easy to reproduce proof of concept exploit to basically show you how to potentially execute this. The problem here is, again, as so often, MCP. That's, of course, the protocol that, well, as I mentioned, I think last week or the week before, often leads to these vulnerabilities because it sees itself just as a proxy forwarding data, and exploitability happens if you accept data from untrusted endpoints. Well, and that's it for today. So thanks for listening, and talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.